Why look for conspiracy when stupidity can explain so much? A quote by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Ah, Goethe. Goethe.
Why, Marie?
indeed,
Why do we look for
Goethe?
conspiracy when it's just that idiots run everything?
So, in our discussions about Denver International Airport, it's probably a good idea to catch up a little bit on conspiracy theory.
Probably.
Probably
It's
a good
good
idea to talk about conspiracy theory. Not that people haven't, don't have a wealth of conspiracy theories coming at them 24/7 these days, but it's good to step back and put into a little bit of perspective. And we ourselves, mad scientists, actually talked about them in a past episode, probably more than once, but namely in 2016, which seems like a million years ago.
Which must have been like the third episode or something, which is crazy.
Of our 17-part series.
Wow, ridiculous. Yeah, I know, seriously. All right, it's going to be great. We're going to talk about conspiracy theories. We're going to dig into them, and then we're also going to get into, of course, how the lizards are controlling global trade through the airport. Jake, roll the tape.
I love conspiracy theories still. I'm going to admit that. I'm just going to admit that.
It's, you know what? I was said this on someone else's podcast. Conspiracy theories were fun until the guy with the nuclear codes was spewing them.
I think
it's all fun and games until somebody gets nuked in the eye.
it's all fun. Yeah, it's all fun and games until somebody says, "Hey, pass the football." Right? Tells the security guard or the CIA agent to pass the football and give them the codes. So how did we talk about conspiracy theories before in the past? And really, and has it changed very much since then?
I think that there is definitely a kind of a cutting off point where governments and politics use conspiracy theories. Like there's a lot of people will say that there's a break between kind of a pre-conspiracy theory age and a post-conspiracy theory age. And usually Americans will put it at the death of JFK. The assassination of JFK is like before conspiracy theories and then after conspiracy theories. And that seems pretty stupid and arbitrary. Clearly, like that, yeah, it made a difference for Americans, kind of, I guess, like the types of conspiracy theories that we sort of talked about. But we already had them out there. I do think, though, and in some ways, too, we have kind of we are going to talk about this. And I think if you watch the news, there's something of a kind of false dichotomy between, or not an economy, again, like a false timeline break between like pre-Donald Trump conspiracies and post-Donald Trump conspiracies, where now everyone takes them super seriously because suddenly like people think that they matter. But actually, again, and we're going to get into this, conspiracy theories have been with us the entire, for all of human civilization. Conspiracy theories have basically been with us from the time that we started living in groups and trading like rocks with each other. There have been conspiracy theories, and I would actually argue, and I don't know, Marie, if you agree with me, I would actually argue that a better timeline break is actually kind of pre and post mass media.
Yeah,
like the invention, the minute that radios became available to every person, or even pamphlets, I guess, like that's the thing. Any timeline break you make is negligible, right? Or it's meaningless.
Yeah.
Right. Because, conspiracy theories, the way that they spread before the printing press and after the printing press, that was pretty different too.
I think you could say it's pre and post industrial revolution somewhat, like, because basically you had to have something to distribute the information. But I think the idea of you could break it down, and I hate to get all anti-capitalist and Marxist, but I do think that there is a certain amount of have and have not to it, right? Like, really, that's what some of conspiracy theories are rooted in. Like that's the real strong, deep roots. Or like some other group of people have access, have money, and have control, or at least perceive that they do. And the injustice that comes along with that sometimes can take the root of a conspiracy theory to make myself feel a little bit more comfortable, or give myself a little bit more of a sense of control over a situation that I feel is unfair. So as long as there's been people with grievances about unfair situations, there's been conspiracy theories. And that's not to say that like people with grievances about unfair situations are all conspiracy theorists. Because I mean, there's a lot of unfair shit happening, since the dawn of time. So let's get that on the record. But I think that this is almost like an after effect, right? That you're going to be feeling these, that there's going to be a group of people that are going to have a reaction to this, or that everyone has a reaction to this at some point in time.
Yeah,
depending on, their own psychological, markers at that point.
What I want to say before we get into this for all the listeners, and just to say it too, and Maria's said it already basically,
is that we're not lizard people.
Right. We're not lizard people. Number one. Number two, no, it's one man's conspiracy theory is another man's propaganda, is another man's good messaging.
Yes.
To the public.
Yes.
It's good social, like good sociology, good public policy. So it's any like timeline, any position you take on like what is and is not a conspiracy. Like some things are obvious, right? Like lizard people aren't controlling the world. That's like, that seems that to me is a conspiracy theory that is like,
right.
Unambiguously stupid. Right.
Right. That's like the far end of the spectrum of conspiracy theories.
Yeah. But getting into more kind of getting into more everyday conspiracy
bread
theories.
And butter conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Your bread and butter conspiracy theories. The government is poisoning people with mass media to keep them stupid. The government is a portion of the government is working against political outsiders to keep them marginalized.
Yes.
Those sorts of conspiracy theories, it really matters your worldview, what you're looking at, because facts don't really matter when it comes to conspiracy theories.
Well, and there have been conspiracy theories that are true.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's put that out there as well.
And that's the other thing.
Ultra actually really truly did happen.
Yeah, they were shooting LSD into people like with dart guns. It's ridiculous, but it's true. And that's the thing as well to keep in mind is, again, not to say that like, all of this is true or all this isn't true, whatever. But conspiracy theories are such a tricky thing because the conspiracy theories that are proven to be true just become part of history.
Yes.
And because they become part of history, they become boring. They become almost hidden just because of how unsensational they are. And often there is no comeuppance for the people that did the bad things. The guys that ran MK Ultra have airports named after them. So, there's nothing bad happens to them because again, it kind of comes with, it's like part of that whole story or that whole thought, history is written by the victors.
Yes.
It's true. Yeah. If a conspiracy theory works and then it's proven, a lot of the times it's conspiracy theory being performed by people in power still. So anyways, something to keep in mind. All right, Marie. So let's talk about this then. What did we used to hear people talk about, or how did we used to hear people talk about conspiracy theories and people who believed them?
Yeah. So I think, and again, we kind of hit on it just over that last little bit in that time, but conspiracy theories are meant to give people a sense of control, right? Like I don't feel like I have agency over some part of my life. And so this internalizes, and having this narrative put upon whatever a given situation is actually gives me a sense of control. And it takes something that you were saying, like it's hard to kind of rationalize or make sense of certain things. So it breaks it down into something that is more interesting and more tangible for people, right? So it's taking the unknown or something that is really vast or something that is really complicated, like a geopolitical whatever, right? And it is breaking it down to a shape that we can imagine. So if we can imagine it and we can kind of make it known to us, then we have a better sense of control over it. And it's giving that sense of like that sense of unease or that sense of apprehension or that sense of, of being out of control, a language that's a simpler narrative to believe. And that's really kind of the general roots of like how we, in our episode, we talked about it, and how we also, how I've, historically, when I think about it or when I read about it, how it's sort of been framed in the past. And so the authors of The Psychology of Conspiracy Theories said, casual explanations serve the need for people to feel safe and secure in their environment and to exert control over their environment as autonomous individuals and as members of a collective. In short, people want to feel safe or feel like we have control over what's happening, right? And I feel like that really kind of is at one of the big foundations of conspiracy theories, right? I want to feel safe. I want to have that identity, and I'm going to seek out others that have that same need and have that same conclusion, right? So it's also sort of like confirmation bias comes into this pretty early on too. Like, I'm not going to challenge that need. Like, I'm not going to find things that make me feel more uneasy. I'm going to try and seek out others that are going to confirm that.
Yeah. And,
go ahead.
No, and it takes away some of the, it almost takes away some of the edge of the bad stuff happening to you.
Yes.
Because it goes from being the system and the society I live in doesn't care about people like me or actively harms people like me to there is some evil power controlling all the strings.
Right.
I actually think it's funny. Katie and I just binge watched Daredevil season 3.
Oh, nice.
Because we just hadn't finished it ever. Even though Daredevil is one of my favorite superheroes.
Yes.
And oh, it's so good. But
yes,
not to give out any
fight scene in the first episode
so good.
Is amazeballs.
So good. All right, so not to give out any spoilers or anything, but the main villain in Daredevil is the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk.
Yeah.
And Kingpin has always been a really interesting character for me because the whole thing with Kingpin is that it's, Daredevil and Spider-Man and all these people that fight against the Kingpin are trying to kind of work within the bounds of the law. And Kingpin is set up in such a way in Hell's Kitchen and in Manhattan, in just New York City, I guess, in general, that the law is working for him. The law protects him. He has those people working for him.
Yes.
And so, but you can imagine that that kind of easy answer that, oh, there's one guy at the top pulling all the strings and making all this terrible stuff happen. And if he was just gone, all of this would go away. Mm-hmm. That's a lot easier to swallow than, hey, there are a lot of dirty cops and dirty FBI agents and just bad people out there that'll do things to hurt you for no reason. Or will do it because they're greedy or, because you can't protect yourself or you can't protect the people you love.
Yes.
It's neater. It's easier. And it also takes away some of the, again, not to say like you have really any control. Like you don't have control over whether or not a guy comes into your house and robs you or something, right? Or a police officer decides to plant drugs on you, right? Like you don't have control over those kinds of terrible things that happen. But I think everyone naturally kind of feels like if something bad happens to you, you want to respond to it in some way and defend yourself.
Yes.
Putting it onto a boogeyman who is pulling all the strings, or even a boogie group, I guess. Mm-hmm. What do you call a boogie? Earth, Wind, and Fire.
A boogie group.
Putting it on Earth, Wind, and Fire really makes it so that there's nothing you could have done
there for you listeners.
That's a callback to the 1960s, I think. Anyways, all right, sorry. So
no, but okay. So just to reiterate a couple other things that you brought up, since you're talking about the Kingpin, there's one major show that you left out that the Kingpin was just in, which was Hawkeye.
Yes.
And I will say that the interesting thing, okay, so again, the hero of it is fighting Kingpin in that episode is Hawkeye, who was Ronin, right? Who was, again, disenfranchised, really disenfranchised by the system and by the snap, right? And felt like he lost his family, he lost his identity, he lost his best friend, right? And so he became Ronin, which gave, which again, sort of, he sort of internalized all of this rage and started to act out to assassinate these figures, right? Which psychologically is really kind of, again, feeding into that entire conspiracy theory.
We all want to think that we would become Ronin or Daredevil. None of us want to think that we're like the old lady on the corner who Kingpin is, hitting up for protection money.
Well, and we also don't ever want to think that we would be Kingpin or that we would ever work for Kingpin.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely
or
not.
That we would become that. Like,
no, I can't pull off a white suit. No way.
You should have seen what he was wearing in. You should have seen what he was wearing in this last one in Hawkeye.
Oh, I got to check it out. Yeah, Hawkeye's the next one we're watching.
It was his Hawaiian. Anyways, again, big Marvel Universe fans. But I think the thing that we're getting to, and it is a quote that I believe was coined by Professor Joseph Urbanski, who writes a lot about conspiracy theories and is really recognized voice in this and is still writing about it even after 2016, which is conspiracy theories are for losers. And that is one of the things that I think is and it's sort of like, it's a little cold. Like when I say it, it's a little like, oh, but it's true. It's like conspiracy theories are for losers. They're for people that feel like they've been disenfranchised or they feel like they've been marginalized. And they don't have a way to address it, or they feel like they don't have a way to address it. So it gives them the opportunity to reject the narrative completely, like we were saying, and that they create their own. And it also gives them sort of like, hey, this is a secret that I know about, right? And me and the members of my tribe that believe in this know about. And it's, again, it builds your own community. It builds your own, like, helps you focus your identity. And it really poses the difference between the dangerous, untrustworthy things out there. And these are things that are a threat. And I'm able to neutralize them with my community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Which again fits really nicely into Daredevil.
Really
Season
does.
3 is great. Season 3 is really good. I
So
like
good.
that. Anyways, okay. So in this way, it's conspiracy theories are both very scary, right? Because you've got the lizard people, you have this, these huge things, but they're also reassuring, right? Because you've got evil that is very, very powerful, but you are kind of struggling on the side of good to counter it. And it's reassuring because it's giving meaning to yourself, like you now have this knowledge and you're in on this secret, but also things aren't random. They're not arbitrary, right? Because I think the reality, or how I look at it is like, this is a kind of a chaotic world and bad things are going to happen, and they may not have any reason. Things are going to happen that may not have reason. And that's really, really frightening. So this is a way to, again, sort of restore that order and give real clear definitions into sort of this duality, in which you can kind of start to invest yourself with some purpose for, I'm going to fight about these things. I've identified them. I've identified like-minded thinkers. So we talk about it to one another, and that kind of gives us this purpose.
What's interesting too is, again, we talked about it again with Daredevil. We should just do a whole episode on Daredevil. It also, I kind of wonder too, because again, at the center of this is sort of this idea of, a good, like good versus evil, and we talked about in the beginning of the season, how that is kind of a very traditional Western view, and not necessarily, I mean, Western. It's like an Abrahamic religion, a Judeo-Christian view.
Yes.
That, you know, there's a God and then there's a devil. There's a light and a dark, a good and an evil. But, you know, in cultures or belief systems, like you can imagine in a belief system, let's say that's polytheistic, where there isn't really a good God and a bad God. There's just sort of gods that do whatever the hell they want.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like we don't really understand what they're doing. You can imagine that kind of idea of a conspiracy or whatever, it might be different than the way that ours are. You know, it might be different than the kind that we expect to see. But it's interesting because a lot of what we think about conspiracy theories just sort of as a population, like just knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, you know, again, this idea like, you know, well, conspiracy theories are, it's just a small amount of people who believe these things and whatever. That's not really true. It's like a pretty, yeah. it can sometimes be a pretty sizable portion of the population. Sometimes like up to 50% of people believe in something that we would consider to be, or what would be termed kind of a conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. And it's not limited really to the powerless or the, well, so that's kind of an interesting thing. And that's, I guess, where Marie and I drew the line when we were writing about this episode, was the time before conspiracy theories were used by the powerful versus today, where it seems like they're used more by the powerful. And I don't actually think that, again, that's like a real distinction, because I think they were always used by the powerful, but we just called them propaganda. We call them something different.
Yes,
but
it's a good point.
You know, the idea of kind of what today, you know, in America we think of as conspiracy theories, that really changes depending on your political bend, you know? So some of these, so if we look at people's conspiracy theories though, so one thing that people kind of say as a knee-jerk reaction or a thought is that it must be that conspiracy theories are more prevalent today than they ever have been. And that's totally not true at all. It's just not true. Conspiracy theories have been around forever at basically the same levels. And even the types of conspiracy theories we've been believing are basically the same conspiracy theories. We just, you know, conspiracy theories don't go away, like pseudoscientific beliefs don't go away. The window dressing changes. The way that we kind of put them together changes to make a new thing. But, you know, conspiracy theory, it's sort of like the menu at Taco Bell. You know, it's all the same couple of ingredients. We just put them together differently and then charge you an extra $1 because it's a chalupa versus a taco. But basically, it's all tacos, you know?
Oh.
So if we look at...
Chalupa hating
pretty
came
good,
out.
right? So one thing that's interesting, though, is conspiracy theory hasn't been... Our definition of conspiracy theory only really has started being thought of in the last, like, 20 years. Mm-hmm. We never really, and at least in America, we never really thought of them before as anything worth studying. And so there aren't actually that many studies on the timeline of conspiracy theories. But one that was done by political scientists Joseph Uchinsky and Joseph Parent.
Yep.
And they looked at 120 years of letters to the editors for the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. It was over 100,000 letters. And they basically found that there was no change in the amount of conspiracy theory beliefs that were expressed in those letters over time. And in fact, the number of conspiracy theory letters actually declined from like the 1890s to the 1960s, and then have been basically the same since then. If we look at statistics on, say, the JFK conspiracy theory, it's been the same since JFK was assassinated. About 40% of the population does not think that Lee Harvey Oswald operated alone. That has been, it's just steady. That's been the thought process and the belief.
Which is incredible. I mean, that is an interesting article. I read that a while back. Yeah.
Yeah. And it looks at too. So other conspiracy theories too. So again, if we look at these, right. So, President Barack Obama was not born in the United States. 11% strongly agree. 13% agree. George Soros is behind a hidden plot to destabilize the American government, take control of the media, and put the world under his control. 9% strongly agree, 10% agree, 44% neither agree or disagree. That one's kind of funny to me. Like, I guess I don't know enough about George Soros to say for sure, but I guess it could happen.
It could happen.
The current financial crisis is secretly orchestrated by a small group of Wall Street bankers to extend the power of the Federal Reserve and further their control of the world economy. 8% strongly agree, 17% disagree. The three that get really strong disagreement, which is interesting. The Obama was not born in the United States one that gets strong disagreements.
Yes.
The planning of September 11th gets strong disagreement with 41% strongly disagreeing. Chemtrails, 42%. And this one is my favorite because it's one that's hit my life because my grandmothers on all sides of the family believed this. The U.S. government is mandating the switch to compact fluorescent light bulbs because such lights make people more obedient and easier to control. 4% strongly agree, 7% agree.
Wow.
Interesting.
The nanas don't trust the light bulbs, huh?
They do not trust the light bulbs. So
light bulbs.
One that's actually super common in American belief, though, and again, we kind of touched on it with some of those, like with George Soros and stuff, the belief in the Illuminati. The belief in the Illuminati is as American as apple pie.
Yes.
It goes back to the founding of our country, of people like Jedediah Morse, Timothy Dwight, and the Evangelical Federalists, right? So like the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. They believe that there was an attempt to essentially take over the American government, to get rid of all the Christians from the country. And so, yeah. So, and there were a lot of, again, it's interesting because there was a lot of people in New England, especially, who thought that this was a real threat, that, you know, people were coming to take over. They were going to take over and get rid of the Christianity from the Christian founding of America. And so it's some of the people too. These were not like small figures. Timothy Dwight was the head of Yale University. So like these were important people.
Yeah, but you can also see, like, again, I think you can start to argue, well, all right, 1790s, the founding, we're still kind of figuring shit out, right? I mean, America's still becoming a country. There are a lot of unknowns, right? There's still a lot of unknowns. There's not a lot of reliable data, right? Your communication is smaller with smaller groups of people, more sporadic. You're facing more external threats that are I'm air quoting, like non-Christian threats, right? From your environment. So I can see that, like, the idea of the Illuminati, I can see how that could also really you can see how it could seep in and take hold. Like that to me is like, I get the Illuminati being more believable back then, but what blows my mind is that it's still as prevalent today.
Well, what's, again, at the core, right? People, I firmly believe the more and more that we do this show and the more and more time I spend, like, wading through the grossness of paranormal and conspiracy Twitter. Some people are wonderful. It can be really great, but sometimes it can be a real hellhole. One thing I've definitely learned, or I guess I've come to believe, is that, again, the extraneous part of what people believe, the facts, the stuff that they talk about, doesn't really matter. It's the underlying motivations, it's the values that really are what set the tone for whether or not you'll believe in a conspiracy theory or something like that. So if you think about early Illuminati theory, they were worried that Christianity was being removed from America. And so the power of Christians was being taken away by other people. That's the exact same fear that's driven QAnon, and I would argue it's a big part of the fear.
Yes.
That's driven QAnon and these other kind of modern day conspiracy theories too, right? Like the idea that, you know, America is no longer going to be like a white Christian nation in a generation. That's pretty scary for someone who, when they think about what America means, they think about, you know, Billy and Jane and their golden retriever and the white picket fence and their two, you know, their dad and mom. The mom, you know, blonde hair, blue eyed, stays at home and bakes. The dad, you know, brunette, tall, muscular, whatever, works for the CIA, putting LSD in people's drinks. You know what I mean? Like, that America is going away.
Yeah.
And you know, and for some people, like when I think of America, I think about like my family's experience. Like I think about people coming here from war-torn countries and like starting over. You know, that's what I think about. So,
well,
anyways.
I think my point being is like you have more. There's more difference now than there was, you know, in the 1790s. You have other. You are actually exposed to other life events and to other things. I mean, again, I think it kind of, that can also, to your point, maybe cause a reaction to people to even, you know, knee jerk further into the idea of the Illuminati, or that there's, you know, they're coming to take us, they're coming to destroy our Judeo-Christian, you know, society. And it's like, I think, but to me, it's like, wow, that's like, it's one of the things that seems like that's so huge and is so ridiculous, and it is so hard to challenge. Like, you should be able to deprogram that. Logically, I think to myself, you should be able to deprogram that within people within a certain amount of time. Like,
yeah, but we're like
exposure and everything else, but you don't. Like, that's why. But I'm like, that's why you think it's easy, but it's like, no, that's like, to me, that the idea that Illuminati is like, that's behind it is so like you're saying, that's like so well worn, but it's so ingratiated. And it's also, like you were saying, can be used in propaganda. It can be used to instigate fear in people to take an action and vote a certain way without really thinking, without really understanding any of the effect.
Well, we also, I think, I think, Marie, you and I would both agree on this as a knee-jerk position, but maybe I actually think nowadays I think the opposite almost. But I think we would initially have said that access to more better information should make people less susceptible to conspiracy theory belief.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true. I think that's kind of what the thought and goal and kind of, I think, belief of educators or sociologists who study this, or, you know, people think that if you give people the right information or access to good versus bad information, that most people will choose good information. And maybe that's true. I hope that that's true. But I think it honestly almost more matters who's giving the information.
I would say that. I mean, I feel like it still comes down to education.
It does. Well, it kind of does. But again, you know,
in that's who's giving that information, right? Like, I think information, like you're saying, information is now out there in abundance. Like, if you want to find out something, or if you want information, it's Google, right? Like, you can get to it. I think the shaping of that information and the education around how do you think about education, and how do you challenge education, and sort of the role of an educator is more important now than anything else.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, clearly, you know, a good portion of the population thinking that the guy who used to make people eat testicles on TV is a good source of information. That's probably not super great. But anyways.
Well,
okay.
Yes.
Let's do.
Yes.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I would say, and I agree with you. But I think then that it also comes with a certain amount of responsibility. Because I think that the guy who, you know, has a massively successful podcast, and good up for him, would say that he doesn't have necessarily a responsibility to edit or he's presenting the information. He's out there and he's asking questions.
I'm just asking questions.
But again, like, I think that in like Facebook, like other platforms, kind of evades the responsibility of, well, you have a responsibility, or like,
well, the other part of that though too is the only reason we're even talking about, we're gonna get back to the episode in a second here, but you know,
Bigfoot
people, but the thing is too, people only expect you to have that responsibility once you start making money, and at that point it's too late.
Right.
You know, right, I mean, right. You know, we started a podcast with $20 and hope, and people listen to us every week that we get an episode out. But people listen to us, you know, and I hope that people are listening to us and thinking like, well, maybe Chris is a little biased, or maybe Marie doesn't know what she's talking about here, or whatever. But you know,
I hope you're listening to us and you're thinking we're full of shit.
Yes, but you know,
that's healthy.
We all have a responsibility, and we take that responsibility fairly seriously here, like you and I do. But you know, the just asking questions thing, that's super popular. You know what I mean? Look at the paranormal charts, man. That's super duper popular. So, anyways, all right, we're getting back into it after this break. Chris here, jumping into this episode to talk about one of our sponsors, BetterHelp. If you've listened to the show, you've heard Marie and I wax philosophical about our own mental health ups and downs, talk about how world events have led to spikes in anxiety or depression, and complain about how hard it can be to seek help when you need it. Which is why we wanted to talk a little bit about BetterHelp, a service which will match you to a licensed, professional therapist from the safety and privacy of your own home. BetterHelp is not a crisis line, and it's not a self-help gimmick. It's professional counseling, without the awkward waiting rooms and hoop jumping required to find a therapist on your own. Once matched, you can send a message to your counselor anytime and schedule weekly video or phone sessions from their convenient online system. The service is available worldwide, making great mental health care more accessible for everyone, and you can be matched with a specialist even outside of your geographic area if needed. And changing counselors is free and easy, so that you can ensure you're getting the best therapeutic match possible. Best of all, it's more affordable than traditional online counseling, and financial aid is even available for those who might need it. I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener of the show, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/madscientist, all one word. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/madscientist.
Hey there, listener. Have you ever watched a movie? Well, great. My name's Mati, professional amateur marathoner and an even amateur podcaster. If you're like me, after watching a movie, you just have to talk about it, find out what you missed, and dive deep into what works and what doesn't work. Introducing the Movie Marathoners Podcast, a podcast where I am joined by a rotating cycle of amazing and talented guests to review, discuss, and rank films and television shows. From blockbusters like Avengers Endgame and the Star Wars saga, to indies like Portrait of a Lady on Fire. We run, get it? Through the good, the bad, the old, and the new. So tune in to the Movie Marathoners Podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember, life's a marathon, not a sprint. So let's take it one movie at a time.
And we're back from the break.
We're still not lizard people.
Still not lizard people. No eggs over here.
Sure.
Definitely no eggs in my brain. There are a couple of different ways to think about conspiracy theories. So Jesse Walker in 2013 argued that there's 5 types of conspiracy theories. The enemy outside theory. So there's a figure scheming against a community. The enemy within, which is there's somebody inside of your organization or community that is trying to destroy ordinary citizens. The enemy above, which is somebody above your place, so someone in a position of power manipulating others for their gain. The enemy below, which is lower classes, so the poor, the downtrodden, whoever, coming together to overturn existing social standards. And the benevolent conspiracies, where angelic forces, so your benevolent space brothers, all that good stuff, are trying to help people and improve the world around us. That's kind of based on sort of the way the conspiracy works. Another way of thinking about them is from Michael Barkin, who talked about the kind of the not really the source, I guess, of the conspiracy, but kind
like
of the
buckets. They're sort of like, you had to classify them, sort of just like what Jesse did above.
Yeah, so Jesse talks about kind of who is performing the conspiracy. This is almost more like the interwovenness or the kind of the web of the conspiracy. So there's event conspiracies. Those are like, Kennedy assassination, 9/11, those kinds of things, right? A conspiracy around a specific event that happened to a lot of people. Systemic conspiracy, which these are the ones that are really kind of deep. These are the ones that are talking about like, Jews control the media or the lizard people or whatever. And super conspiracy theories, which is these are the ones that are kind of, they take conspiracy theories together, so smaller conspiracy theories, and merge them into one bigger one. So again, if you think that, like, when we talked about like Jewish control of the media, that's one portion of a larger anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, say pushed forward by like David Icke or Bill Cooper, right, where the Jews control the media. They also control banking. They, poison wells. They like do all the crazy shit that Borat thinks. But because it's not a guy with a fake mustache and a crazy accent, people are like, that makes sense. Because it's Alex Jones saying the crazy shit and claiming it's lizards as opposed to, gnomes or whatever. People are like, yeah, that makes perfect sense now.
Yeah. It's sort of like, this is the overarching, this is the umbrella. Is how I look at like the super conspiracy. Is it can take any of, like, it can take enemy above, enemy below, event, systemic.
It merges them all together.
Yeah, it's the big soup.
Yeah, so you can think like the enemy below, like the, again, kind of the idea that like a Jewish cabal of people control the world. That merges all of the 5 types together. In some cases,
yeah. It's also how you apply that, right? Because the event could be they were behind this particular event, right?
Yes,
or they were, they are working within this community or whatever it is. Yeah, it's a super. Yeah, I mean, it's, to me, and it's like it works really well because, again, there's nothing to disprove it. Right, there's no friction in any of that. It can all go, like, it's easy to put everything together.
Yeah, there's always another conspiracy you can make to make the link work
stronger. Yeah, there's nothing that works against it.
Yeah, a more simplistic, but I think actually almost a more powerful way of lumping them together is by Murray Rothbard, who says that there's deep conspiracy theories and then shallow conspiracy theories. And so not even conspiracy theories, there are theorists. So shallow theorists and deep theorists. A shallow conspiracy theorist those are the kind of people that are always like, well, who benefits from this? Like, cui bono? So, if the Twin Towers are taken down and somebody put out a big insurance claim on the towers that year, then they must be responsible for 9/11. They must have been involved because they benefited. Kind of a simple one, and it basically says that whoever is kind of like we'll follow the money.
Yeah,
it's simplistic. The reason is easy, and actually a lot of the
reason
times
is logical. I think that's also the reason it's shallow.
And the reason is logical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Deep conspiracy theorists, though, what they do is they start off by they posit something first, and then they try to find evidence to confirm their initial belief. So your belief that the government is hiding evidence about aliens, you can go out and find evidence for that everywhere. And all you're doing, though, again, because we talk about it a lot, you're not falsifying that thought. You're just confirming it. You can always find evidence to confirm your hunch or your belief. It's very hard, though, to just naturally make yourself want to falsify something. You know? So it's really quite interesting. So there's a lot of ways to think about this stuff. And again, this field is actually pretty young, you know?
And this is confirmation bias, though, is what you're
exactly. It's basically confirmation bias run amok. The last kind of part of conspiracy theory that I think is really, really interesting, and I actually think it's sort of it's really, I think, something that we should dig deeper into, almost maybe do its own episode on. Is so a lot of people have asked themselves, well, where have conspiracy theories come from? Like what has made what makes conspiracy theories thrive since, let's say, the Industrial Revolution? And the sociologist Bruno Latour suggests that it's actually the pervasiveness of critical theory. And so he talks about this in an article called "Why Has Critique Run Out of Steam? From Matters of Fact to Matters of Concern." And so what do I mean by critique? Critique, or kind of critical theory, it really comes from Marxism, or it's most famous in Marxism, I guess. But it sort of comes from previous notions as well. But essentially, like, when you hear critical theory, like, there's a reason, like, we call it critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical whatever. These are from the same school of thought. And the basic idea is that you should, to understand the way that society is, you have to look at the roots of power and how those power functions kind of work within each other. Which, if you think about what we just said about, like, cui bono, or those shallow versus deep conspiracy theories, it's a little bit concerning to maybe think that, well, wait a second, that kind of sounds a little similar. Yeah, that it sounds a little close in its thinking. And so what Bruno argues in this article really is that although social criticism, so criticizing social structures and society in general based on those power dynamics, is powerful. It has been powerful and has led to really great benefits, say, in the rights of women and the rights of minorities and other people that have been historically treated like shit. Yeah. He says the following. So, quote, "We can summarize, I estimate, 90% of the contemporary critical scene by the following series of diagrams that fixate the object at only two positions, which I have called the fact position and the fairy position. Fact and fairy are etymologically related, but I won't develop this point here. Thank God, because most philosophers would be like, let's get into what these words mean for 1,000 pages.
I'm sort of like,
All right, so the fairy position is very well known and is used over and over again by many social scientists who associate criticism with anti-fetishism. And again, fetishism, or fetish in this case, means like creating a symbol or making something have meaning beyond what it really is. So the example that was given to me in my social criticism class was a sneaker, right? Like, shoes are just shoes. They're just for covering your feet. But a sneaker, a Nike, an Air Jordan, that has all kinds of other meanings dug up into it, which is a fetishization of kind of its form, right? It's more than its form.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you're getting. No, I agree. I do think that I think that that's a whole, that in itself is a whole other, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what he continues.
But it's fascinating because I just want to, you can get into social deconstruction, right? Like,
yeah.
Right?
So
that's what
this is, he digs in. Yeah. So he goes, the role of the critic is then to show that what the naive believers are doing with objects is simply a projection of their wishes onto a material entity that does nothing at all by itself. Here they have diverted to their petty use the prophetic for fulmination against idols, They have mouths and speak not. They have ears and hear not. But they use this prophecy to decry the very objects of belief, gods, fashion, poetry, sport, desire, you name it, to which naive believers cling with so much intensity. And then the courageous critic, who alone remains aware and attentive, who never sleeps, turns those false objects into fetishes that are supposed to be nothing but mere empty white screens on which is projected the power of society, domination, whatever. The naive believer has received a first salvo. So what he's saying here is criticism has basically become douchebags tearing down fun things to be like, look, man, you're controlled by the media because you like Ariana Grande or whatever, man. Like, don't you realize that she's just part of the military industrial complex? Right? That's literally what he's saying here. A little bit less silly, but like basically that's what he's saying.
Yeah. I don't know how much I don't know how much I personally buy into this. But yes, go ahead. So
next, yes. So he continues.
Okay.
But wait, a second salvo is in the offing. And this time it comes from the fact poll. I don't know where the fact poll is, but keep it away from me. This time it is the poor bloke, again taken aback, whose behavior is now explained by the powerful effects of indisputable matters of fact. You, ordinary fetishists, believe you are free, but in reality, you are acted on by forces you are not conscious of. Look at them. Look, you blind idiot. And here you insert whichever pet facts the social scientists fancy to work with, taking them from economic infrastructure, fields of discourse, social domination, race, class, and gender, maybe throwing in some neurobiology, evolutionary psychology, whatever, provided they act as indisputable facts whose origin, fabrication, mode of development are left unexamined. So, what he's saying basically is the field of criticism, or the field of kind of social criticism, in his view, has helped create this sort of bed where conspiracy theories can form, because it creates this case where it doesn't really matter what you're criticizing, because you're always going to be right to criticize it. So let's take art, right? So he says, the first thing you can say is, well, art is just a fetishist. It's just this thing that means nothing. Art doesn't mean anything. The fact that you and Marie like the Daredevil show is because of, they're just creating something, some importance here for you that really has no effect on your life, and it shouldn't have any power over you, right? Chris, you shouldn't buy Daredevil comics anymore because the character is made up and it's just social control on top of you, right? And then says further than the fetishization of the thing itself, that thing was used to control you. This story of a hero fighting a villain, don't you see its parallels to your real life? Don't you see that there are real villains out there that are controlling you? And so they feed you this slop on Netflix because it will keep you happy and dull to the real attack on you and your freedoms that is happening around you.
I'm with you.
So what he's it's a lot. But basically what he's saying is that sociology, critical theory, philosophy, a lot of our science is based on the same idea too, of kind of criticism and a lot of the same kind of foundations of like critical theory. Critical theory is based on this idea that like humans are animals, and so we're driven by economics, which is which is just part of us gaining energy. Like, it's a whole big thing.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of our modern day views are based on this idea, and so
of constructions.
Kind of, yeah. Right. It's sort of what he's saying is, if we're teaching people, if we're saying to people that these unseen worlds of social control and domination really exist out there, why wouldn't they take the next step to say, well, yeah, you're right, those things do exist, and some people are using them for their own benefit?
Well, why don't you think that I think that social criticism is actually saying that. You're arguing that social criticism is saying that there's real conspiracy out there. I am saying that I think that it is not just like a back and forth, right? Like I think you have the fairy position and you have the fact position, right? And so you have these things volleying back and forth about whatever, about a sneaker, right? Like you could say, I think a sneaker is actually kind of an easier one for me to get my head around, because you could say, well, okay, so the sneaker embodies to me, you know, if it's an Air Jordan, it's about, you know, it's about the success, it's about this, you know, social scarcity. It's about the idea of Michael Jordan himself. And then you can come back with the fact position and be like, Nike's making millions of dollars off of that. And, you know, it's kids in China assembling them. Right. So, I mean, you have that sort of back and forth dialogue about it, but you also have like other aspects outside of that, like somebody saying, yeah, but I buy this sneaker, I hold on to this sneaker, and all of a sudden this sneaker can put me through college, right? Like,
so what? Yeah, but so what he's saying though, I think would be, and I agree with you.
I mean, but there's a lot of different. Like, I think my point is that you don't get to. There is no one person that gets to define what is a fairy position or what is a fact position, and the fact that he's trying to define it to me is sort of arbitrary and is sort of.
I think you're getting caught up on the fairy versus fact position thing. What he's arguing, I guess, is more about how those positions imposed on people make them view the world. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So he's saying that it doesn't matter which one you take. In both cases, the end point is that
you're being
someone else is controlling you in secret. That in some way you are being controlled in secret. And so the idea that, you know, when people ask, well, why do more people believe? And again, he's working from a false premise, I think, which is more people believe in conspiracies now than they ever did. Because he's arguing that it's from the 1970s on, it's because of critical theory that people believe in conspiracies. And that's not true. Right?
Right.
So, yeah. So I think the more interesting thing is, again, it's kind of like another way of, again, I would actually think that this positioning or this kind of argument that he's making more shows that in itself is kind of a conspiracy theory, right?
Well, that's
it's this idea that like the academics then are
masking it or making it harder to. But I think that's what I'm saying too, is like he's coming at it from, and I don't, you know, besides the two positions, but just sort of that what I'm getting at is sort of he's saying that dialogue in itself is masking, but it's sort of like, well, he's coming at it from a position of this assumed authority, like. You can't say that one of these things isn't right, and that these dialogues or discussions aren't opening up to have further thought about something.
Yeah, like so then what do you do then? You don't criticize society.
You don't.
What do you do then?
Yeah, you don't deconstruct things. You don't ask these kind of questions or something, because it's like. He's basically saying it's like a circle jerk, and everybody feels like, oh, they're right afterwards.
I think
it's sort of like,
he's basically saying
isn't he sort of a circle jerk with this by saying like, look what I pointed out, like you're all wrong and we should never examine it. But he just examined the hell out of this.
Yeah, I think
he didn't go
like,
into the difference between fairy and fact, right? He could have, but he didn't. So he's kind of a jerk. Sorry.
Yeah, he's kind of critiquing, like, and again, I don't know. I only read the one article that he wrote, right? So like, we don't know his whole thing or whatever, but
we're not full on Latour hating.
It seems to me that the argument is basically, this guy basically his argument is, don't have the circle jerk if you're going to complain about chafing afterwards.
But maybe chafing is half the point,
what it seems
right?
like to me.
If you don't chafe, like that's my whole point is like the reason you have these discussions are to have the discussions. I don't want to say it's just, I'm just asking questions, but it's like, it is kind of positioning your thought to be critical about how you approach things. And are these things worthy of asking questions? And without asking them, you're not going to know. But with it comes that responsibility of what do I do with this knowledge? But I think there's a difference in learning about them and thinking about them in a classroom versus going and, and espousing, untruths to 11 million listeners.
Yeah, again,
I'm just asking.
We're right back to is odd, right? It's
kinda.
He's making the argument that that he's almost making the argument that truth is not a. Well, anyways, I don't know, because I think another way you can read this is thinking about the outcomes of these. Like, I think the argument I don't know for sure, but to me it seems like if the point of critical theory is to point out modes of social control that make people do things against their well-being or whatever,
right?
If the point of criticism is to point out those power structures and how they affect people and everything else,
right?
Then this might be a mechanism by which, and again, this is kind of a different viewpoint, but something I think is true, that this prevalence of like conspiracy theory or the way that criticism can easily divulge or fall into conspiracy theory is itself maybe a way that the superstructures that do exist out there in terms of power and everything else can leverage these critical elements, this weapon that was once used against them. They can leverage that weapon to protect themselves more. Right? So like the king, the king, there used to be assassins who came after the king, but now the king has hired the assassins to go after his enemies. Why an airport, Marie? Why did the Illuminati build a goddamn airport?
Where are we talking about? Listen, people.
Next time, we're going to answer the question, but why an airport?
Why an airport?
All right. Dear listeners, thanks for listening to the show. It's a pleasure as always. We love you all.
And I hope you all think we're full of shit and are asking yourself that question. That's important.
It is important. Don't trust us. We don't know anything.
Don't trust us just because we're on a highly lucrative and very popular podcast.
Because we spent $30 on microphones.
Wait, you spent 30?
No, it's been more.
Mine was at a yard sale. Anyways.
All right, dear listeners, we love you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production. Karen Douglas, Robbie Sutton, and Alexandra Chachaksra? Oh.
T'Chaka?
T'Chaka? That doesn't sound right. The authors of the Psychology of Conspiracy Theories.
Let's redo that.
Sad.
Let's redo that.
I know. I'm just going to say, oh my God. It's also hard. It's harder to scroll on Google. I'm a loser. I'm old. Okay, so from...
Hey there, listener. Have you ever watched a movie? Well, great. My name's Mati, professional amateur marathoner and an even amateur podcaster. If you're like me, after watching a movie, you just have to talk about it, find out what you missed, and dive deep into what works and what doesn't work. Introducing the Movie Marathoners Podcast, a podcast where I am joined by a rotating cycle of amazing and talented guests to review, discuss, and rank films and television shows. From blockbusters like Avengers Endgame and the Star Wars saga, to indies like Portrait of a Lady on Fire. We run, get it? Through the good, the bad, the old, and the new. So tune in to the Movie Marathoners Podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember, life's a marathon, not a sprint. So let's take it one movie at a time.